You probably know this about me, but in case you don't, I ride bicycles. And there's two kinds of cyclists, those who have come off their bicycle and those who are yet to come off their bicycle. And just like that, there's two kinds of people, I believe. Those who have had their moment of crippling dread when they come to the realization of the full extent of the current and future effects of global warming and a fossil fuel economy, and those who are yet to. I am in the latter category in the first instance and the former category in the second. So yes, I've come off my bicycle, and yes, I've been through the horror of understanding what's going on and what will happen. And when I did have my moment of climate dread, which I've quite publicly talked about, it sent me into a period of quite acute mental illness. I didn't believe there was anything I could ever do that would ever make it any better. But there was, and it is, vastly. Because even with the overwhelming blanket of fear and destabilization of everything from ecosystems, weather patterns, and society that we're already very clearly seeing, there is hope and there is possibility. The antidote to climate anxiety is climate action. And my podcast guest this week has written a remarkable book all about action, possibility, and ultimately freedom from the paralysis that climate anxiety can have on your life. And I know about that all too well. Claire O'Rourke's latest book is called Together We Can, and I can't wait for you to hear our conversation today. When I first started having conversations about climate here on this show, I would be so scared. I didn't want to talk about that stuff. I wanted to talk to actors, I wanted to talk to athletes and entrepreneurs, but I also knew that not having those conversations was making my fear of having them way more painful, way more scary. So I just started doing it. Now, sometimes I'd need a few days to recover, literally. But each time it got a little easier. I remember speaking with Jamie Simmons, the man who moved the town of Grantham, and how his work is now being adopted around the world as the method for managed retreat in climate vulnerable areas. That was a really, really important chat. And I was kind of dizzy for about 3 days afterwards and just kind of stared at the walls. But I pressed on because these conversations are conversations we need to be having more and more and more. A United Nations committee recently found that my country of Australia had violated the human rights of a group of Torres Strait Islanders by failing to adequately protect them from the impacts of climate change. It's just one of a growing body of climate cases being brought right around the world on human rights grounds. And that ruling is expected to inspire many more such cases. The rising sea levels have already damaged the way people source their food. The ocean has already uncovered ancestral burial sites, scattering human remains. Even their homes are at risk of being submerged. Now, that's Torres Strait Islands. That's Australia. But for many of us, it's a far, far away place. It's impossible to picture it. It's impossible to understand it. Therefore, it doesn't matter. I'm not speaking in hyperbole when I say that it won't be long before we are having similar kind of conversations about what's happening in the Torres Strait, about cul-de-sacs and caravan parks on the central coast of New South Wales, on parts of the Gold Coast, and a fair part of eastern Brisbane up in Queensland, where I grew up. Now, this can freeze you in fear. I get it. It happened to me for a long time. It was terrifying. But once that's happened, and once the grief has passed, what do you do? How do you keep getting out of bed every day and play with your kids and encourage them to try hard? By taking action and by being inspired by those who are taking action. And that is exactly what my guest today is all about. Claire O'Rourke is a journalist, an activist, and an author with experience in writing and campaigning all over the world. Claire has held a number of significant leadership positions, including most recently at Amnesty International Australia and as National Director of community-led renewable energy advocacy organisation Solar Citizens. Claire has a broad history of organising and of campaigning in social movements and for organisations that deliver positive impact, including overseeing communications for Australia's successful Every Australian Counts campaign for the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Now, Claire's book, it's called Together We Can. It's a glorious story of Australians on the front lines of climate action. For us to maintain and even improve our way of life, it's going to take a massive all-hands-on-deck effort, and it can honestly be overwhelming just thinking about where to begin. This book highlights people from all around Australia who are making a difference. Food producers, sports people, financiers, psychologists, First Nations people, entrepreneurs, public servants, scientists, teachers, actors, farmers, students, even retirees. When I was really sick, I did not believe that people like Claire existed, let alone the people that she spoke to. But she does, and they do, and it is bloody inspiring. The book, Together We Can, is out now wherever you get your books. You can find her on Instagram. She's at Claire O'Rourke. Enjoy this conversation with Claire. We're here.
Nice
Claire,
to meet you.
Nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate your latitude on timings. My brain's a bit porridgy at the moment from the antibiotics that I'm on, but it's extraordinary. I did not want to miss a chance to speak to you. Together We Can is an extraordinary book, and when I was really, really sick, I tried. My brain understood that there'd be very smart people working as hard as they can to try and do the best they can, as much as they can, as quick as they can. My brain knew that, but I couldn't accept it. I was so ill, and the kind of tingling tendrils of psychosis were getting into my brain so much and distorting my thinking so negatively, it wouldn't accept it as a truth. And that was a really hard thing to do. So to see this, in my hands here, makes me feel, really, really good. And I'm bloody grateful for it, because it's overwhelming and too much if you suddenly start to think about it. Like, clearly there's a moment in your life where you realized, maybe well before you had your big moment. When did you realize in your life that you thought about people and the overall impact of you and our society kind of differently to others? Were you a kid? Were you a teenager?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. So I could give you the boring answer on, I've worked on social justice since I, kind of walked away from journalism proper, 15 or so years ago. But actually, the person who taught me about what responsibility means for society is my grandmother. So I lived with her for my first year out of school in Epping in Sydney. And she was a fierce activist, but very much driven by her religion. So she was a Catholic, deeply Catholic, went to church every day of her life from her mid-20s, and she was a big, actually a pro-life activist. And so she was vice president of Pro-Life New South Wales. She was involved in the local progress groups and all this kind of stuff. And we used to have these massive arguments about social issues because we just simply didn't agree on what was right. And she passed away about 17 years ago when my eldest child was about 4 months old. And from her deathbed, like a couple of days before she died, she said to me, well, I got up on my soapbox and you got up on yours, but at least we both got up. And it's such a good line, but of course, she had a really great line, like a couple of days before she passes, she's
I've written all of mine. I don't know about you, but all mine are already scripted.
It was so good. But also just kind of, she just taught me to be engaged in the society you're in, and, you have a responsibility to be part of it. So that's probably driven a lot of the work that I've done, the way I live my life.
What did you learn about seeing the humanity in a person the way you mentioned what your grandmother was campaigning for, I draw a conclusion that you may have had differing views on women's healthcare.
I
What
do.
did you learn about connecting with someone as a human in a loving way? There's your grandma taken into a home. You're living with her. You care for her.
Yeah.
You're related by blood. She's got your mother or father's face on her. You've got her face on you, and yet you differ so extraordinarily. What did you learn about connecting and still being able to connect with someone that you love, even though you differ ideologically?
I just learn by doing. I think that's what we do as people. We learn by doing. Like she taught me things like, how to make a really good cake and that you always should wash up as soon as you put the cake in the oven. Like she just taught me very practical things about how to live. But she was always doing something for a cause she believed in or for her family or for her community. So she was very connected and I respected that. And I think we need to have really deep respect for people if we're going to exist in this world, even when we don't agree with people on particular issues. And I think where we're at, on climate change, which I've written about, is that most people actually really care about it. So I think it's become so politicised that we think we can't connect on this issue with people, but that's just not what the research says. And so I think it's important to preserve relationships at all costs because that's what we're going to need in moments of crisis that are going to come down the line with climate.
But Claire, like we pretty much engage with nearly everyone that we disagree with in the safe, anonymous space of being online, where it's easy for us to write them off as a human for all eternity and never, ever have any validation of anything they ever say ever again. Block, ban, mute, boom, done.
Used to be easier.
That's not the world, though, is it?
No, it used to be. I used to actually ring up people that would troll me or kind of, put nasty comments back in the day. It was just too hard now. You just like look them up and then you ring them up and go, hey, do you want to have that conversation rather than, just
really?
kind of, yeah, it didn't last long because, there's too much of that kind of stuff now. There's no point engaging with trolls, and trying to fight it out with them because that just feeds the algorithms that are driving us apart. But I do think there's ways you can connect with people who really disagree. And I think part of the reason that climate's been so difficult over the last 10 or 15 years is that, people have been used as kind of collateral damage in the culture wars. These communities have been set up to fight it out against each other when really, when you put people in a room and you get them to start thinking about what the future should be like, people really agree on fundamental values, fundamental desires for the future, fundamental desires to live in a clean and healthy world, to have good careers and, all of those things that help us exist in society. So it's just, I think what we've seen in terms of the way that politics has shifted in Australia is that people are just not buying that kind of stuff anymore, not nearly as much. We're not going to be used as kind of, flag flyers for, people who want to divide us. I think there is a new kind of tone in the country. It's really exciting.
It's certainly the idea of that has certainly sold a lot of newspapers. It's got a lot of clicks and it's got a lot of eyeballs. And there's a terrifying book called Merchants of Doubt. If you care to know the look at your
crushing.
If you're listening and not watching this, Claire's body language just slumped like she was a deflated birthday castle. Like, yeah, it's a horrible book to read because this this is just fine because we're making money off selling newspapers and getting people to watch these cable TV shows, but at the same time, not irreversibly, but like just doing extraordinary damage to our ability as a society to see each other as human. When we are in those moments, Claire, when we do feel that rise up and there's wild research around how our brains and our reactions have been altered by the way we use social media, the way we engage, particularly on things like Twitter and Facebook, how we are shortcut to outrage. When we feel those feelings come up, particularly when dealing with maybe someone we love at a birthday, at a Christmas, when we're going to visit granddad in the home, what can we do about those feelings when they start to go, it's bullshit, Cole's fine? Like, what can we do with those feelings and how do we have that conversation with someone who seems to be so defined by that's not me?
It's so interesting. Everyone I know who cares about climate change seems to want to go and find the person that disagrees with them most and take it on. You know, the Extinction Rebellion activist wants to go and talk to the kind of far right, climate denying guy, right? It's just a real waste of energy. Think about, it's just not worth it. So, we did some research back in 2020 called the Climate Compass, and that showed that about half the country is really worried about climate change. And about a quarter of Australians aged 16 to 75, they're so worried about climate change, we call them the alarmed. So they're really worried. But there's a really small percentage, I think it's about 6%, that are in that kind of denialist, dismissive category. And what's so interesting about it is that, like, if we go and take on those folks, like your Uncle Bob, apologies to any Bobs who do care about climate out there, but if you
There's
go,
always, it's Bob, it's always a Bob.
If you've got an Uncle Bob at the Christmas dinner or whatever, and you're sitting there having an argument, is that really the best use of your time? You might be able to get them on talking about, the benefits of solar panels, bringing the prices down or whatever, helping with the cost of living. But really, it's just not worth your effort. This is really challenging though, because if you've got this internal kind of emotional storm happening because they're just making you so annoyed, I think some of those basic emotional intelligence skills like breathing, counting to 3, changing the subject, talking about the weather, maybe not the weather disasters, but the weather, talking about where you're going on holidays. Some of those circumstances where it's really difficult is where people are in those family relationships where you're kind of right there and you've got to still connect and maintain the relationship. One of the best parts of a piece of advice I got from Mithra Cox, who's a councillor, a Greens councillor on the local council in Wollongong where I live. She's had thousands of climate change conversations, often out on the hustings, handing out flyers or whatever. And her advice is actually just talk about how you feel about climate change, because it's a great leveller. Humans want to help another human who is in distress. And even with people who she could never connect with on the issues, when she talked about how it makes her feel and how climate change keeps her up at night, that's when she gets a moment of breakthrough. So thinking about how we actually connect with our own emotions and talk about them can be a great leveller. Yeah. So rather than kind of going for the science and the facts and trying to win the game, think about trying to win the heart.
It seems that the logical thing to do, though, that, if I bring, I guess it's the way my brain works, if I bring a fact that is irrevocably true, another person who I don't know can see that truth and go, well, okay, now what are you going to do about it? But it doesn't seem to be that way. Unfortunately, there's been so much obfuscation and questioning and myth and doubt about a fucking fact that you're right. It's hard to understand that. There's a few parts of society that are just going to, the edges of the bell curve. It's okay. We'll be fine as long as we can get a big chunk in the middle of the bell curve along for the ride. We're going to be okay. When you worked as a journalist, how early on did you start to see the newswire start to kind of populate with climate stories?
It wasn't actually huge when I was a journalist. I left journalism proper in about 2005, and there were stories were usually about the big meetings, about the global meetings, the Kyoto, and all those kinds of global conferences. So it was more a kind of foreign news story rather than the stories that you see now around the technology advances and the cost curves coming down and the movements of people that are doing incredible work on it. So it really was kind of one of many issues where I think that has shifted quite substantially. What's been kind of interesting in writing the book has been I've worked out kind of right at the end of the process of writing it that I was actually in a mode called constructive journalism, which is kind of, coming around in Europe, of course, where, they're more progressively thinking about these types of things. But constructive journalism has the journalist playing the role of the facilitator or the connector rather than being the kind of cop on the beat or the judge. So they're kind of the modes of the news, daily news journo or the investigative journo. And it's made me reflect a lot on what kind of role should the media be playing at this moment in our history. We should be constructing, good connections and, building great stories and inspiring people with what we can do at this moment when we've got the politics, the economics and the technology all aligning in favour of shifting society.
It's the economic part, and I've said it on the show before. It breaks my heart that it has to be the economic argument, but at this point, Claire, I don't care. I don't give a shit. We're the community in the world that has the largest uptake of rooftop solar panels, and it's not because we love koalas. It's because it's cheap. Fine, put them up there. I don't care why.
That's
Just
right.
do it.
Yeah, more the merrier. It's the solution that we need. I used to run an organisation called Solar Citizens, and it's an awesome organisation that is all about pulling together all the people who have those solar panels on their rooftops. And, it is very satisfying just seeing the free energy, rolling down through your little app. We've got 6.5 kilowatts on our rooftop, and it's just awesome.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Mate, I wish I've been shifting and changing my energy companies to try, because I have a driveway full of electric mobility, and just trying to make sure that we get the best deal on all that. But I cannot wait until, it just makes no sense to me. It's like, hang on a second. So are you telling me that it's easier to have this joule of energy to get my car from here to there, mined from sucked up out of the ground, out of a country that maybe has human rights and politics that I really don't agree with, shoved into an oil tanker, sailed across the world to Singapore, where it's mixed with 18 other countries, and then, brought in another tanker to, a plant over there in Kurnell, where it's shoved into a truck, which is then driven to the servo up the road from me, which I then have to go and it's afterwards refined at extraordinary expense. And then I then put that into my car when I could manufacture that joule myself on my roof for free. Like, why is it easier? I just don't get it.
But the wonderful thing is, it is happening. I think this week, was it just yesterday, that South Australia has produced more from wind power, like 150% for a moment in time, of its whole state's energy needs, and the average whole grid is about 62% renewables generation. Like, it's happening. The states have done amazing work despite all of the political argy-bargy over the last decade. And when we look at these stories and we consolidate them, we realise that lots is happening. And it's just, I found doing it, like writing the book, like super motivating, because it just made me think, you know what, even like all of those moments when I feel like we are going down the toilet, if you look the other way and start thinking, you go in with intention and say, I'm going to look for a story that makes me feel more hopeful, it works. And I had the best time. 75 people I got to speak to who are doing amazing stuff, and it was just so nourishing an experience.
And that's just the 75 you could do in the window of time you had to write it, which is amazing. You had obviously there was a moment when you went from care to concern. Did you yourself get to a space of climate despair? And how, I think personally, I think it's a thing that if you haven't had the bottom fall out of your world, you maybe haven't considered the facts enough, because it is just such a vast thing to conceive of. Our brains wildly can't really picture it. Which is weird. It's a limitation of our own. It's a limitation of our own ability to conceive something, isn't it? Did you have a moment where the floor fell out from under you?
Yeah, it's funny. It came after I'd been working on climate for some years. So, and it sounds like a cliche to talk about it, but the Black Summer fires. I live down in Osher on Dharawal country between the rainforest, like quite next door Illawarra Escarpment rainforest, and about a 10-minute walk from the beach. Beautiful, enormously privileged place to live. It is just diabolically gorgeous where I live, and also really humid most of the time. And so we experienced the fires. We were told by the local fire station to get the house ready, and we kind of spent 2 days cleaning it up, and then realised actually there is no point. It's a weatherboard house. It's covered. It's surrounded by trees. It's going to burn. We packed up our trailer. My daughter, who was about 13, I think at the time, she were standing in tears in our carport watching us do this, and that's when it landed for me. I'm feeling teary thinking about it. It just landed when I was like, not only was there this kind of incredible cognitive dissonance like you were talking about going, hang on, I live next to damp rainforest, near the beach, in suburbia, what the hell is going on? So there was that kind of dissonance, but then it was also just like, this is dangerous for me and my privileged world with my privileged life. I'm going to face more of this. We're all going to face more of this. What's at stake is clear and present. And I really freaked the hell out. I was really quite devastated for months and did some work. I actually did some work on that. I was really, lucky to use some of my pandemic time in the first lockdown to go through some processing of those really charged emotions. Because I was just doing a whole kind of, I did a front face at work, like I'm surrounded by these really gritty, committed climate activists. So I was all in for all that, but privately I was freaking the hell out. And so I did some work on that, and it was really, really great. Really great. Great grief. Good grief, it was called. Yeah.
Did that work look like speaking to someone?
Well, strangely, yes. It meant, so I joined a program that is volunteer run called Good Grief. It's like a global network, a bit like AA. So it has a 10-step program, and you meet every week or fortnight for a couple of hours to just sit in circle, often in person, but this happened to be on Zoom, so I could access it with the pandemic. And it's not a counselling group. It's not run by a psychologist. It's run by someone who's done a bit of basic familiarity with how the thing works. And Liz Wade, who I write about in the book, led these groups with just beautiful care and kindness, and she was very gentle in kind of just opening a space that is called a brave space, not a safe space, but a brave space where you step in with generosity but also with vulnerability. And I met this group of beautiful women from different parts of mainly Victoria who were all going through the same kind of freak out. And, Psychologists for a Safe Climate, which is an Australian organisation, recommends sharing your feelings with other people so you can build that kind of, camaraderie, solidarity, support. But it also, because the program's a little bit structured, you go through the Good Grief 10 steps and you think quite philosophically about your place in the world, the fact that you will die. You could die tomorrow. It really got me to place my life in context, to value the time I have, the privilege I have, the family I have, the health I have, the environment I'm in. But it also made me think really reflectively about my role and what I was going to do. So I was, manage a program at work on energy transition, supporting the climate movement to do great work, important work. But I started really thinking about how I wanted to make a contribution. And that's where the idea for the book kind of came around. So it was like, I can collect stories. I've done that before. I know a lot of people doing amazing things, but I wanted to see more. And I wanted to kind of consolidate this kind of more positive vision because I hadn't seen it around much. I'd seen a lot of the other side, a lot of doom and gloom and,
wildly, Claire, like the doom and gloom stuff also gets clicks and also sells newspapers. And that's the thing, which is the tricky kind of balance in telling the story of it's so fucking bad, we have to do something now.
Yeah.
Yet we want to scratch that eczema, so we click and click and click and click and then we're fucked. But that kind of gets you in a state of paralysis and you end up being so overwhelmed you can't do anything, which is a wild thing about, like, when I think, you guys didn't live with the war. Like, think back, 1933 all the way to 1939, 1940. We could do something about the rise of fascism. There's something we can do. Me and my friends were going to go to a training camp. We're going to get on a boat. We're going to go and sort this out because that is no way to treat another human, and I don't want to live on a planet when that's happening. Great, Manhattan Project. Boom, let's go. Like, things with practical things. But this is so huge. There's it's so big you can't start anyway. You're literally holding back the tide with a dustpan and brush. Like, it's so easy to get overwhelmed. You're just paralyzed. So if people do find themselves in that space, what do you think? What have you learned from your work, from your chatting with people? What have you learned as the first step away from that place of paralysis.
I just love how you can just flip that whole concept. It's so overwhelmed. There's, it's just everywhere. Yeah, it's everywhere. Isn't that a great opportunity to step in? I don't want to sound Pollyanna about this because, yes, it's very scary. We have a very short window of time to do something about this problem. But the beauty in that problem is that there is limitless opportunity to take action wherever you are. And there's this wonderful work by Anaya Elizabeth Johnson, who founded the All You Can Save project. And she's...
I've known Ayana for a long time.
Awesome.
Yeah, she's incredible. She's been on this show.
Oh,
she's an
great.
amazing human being. All We Can Save is a fantastic book.
Yeah, so she talks about that Venn diagram between, what you're really good at and what you really love doing and what's required. And that's a great roadmap to begin your own climate journey because you can start really close to home. But I actually think there's another part to it, which is around your networks. And so when we're working in advocacy, we think about our influence because we're always trying to get someone who doesn't want to make a decision to do something that they wouldn't ordinarily do. So we're thinking about how do we influence them. But I don't think people think that they're very influential on their own often. People think they're kind of a bit powerless or other people are making the decisions, which is why we expect the government to do it for us or the leaders of big business to do it for us or just somebody else, please. But some of the social research I write about in the book says that actually the most powerful people are on the fringes of those networks, and behaviour change will spread most quickly when you've got people kind of on the edges of one social network that are also in another social network, and that's the work of Damon Centola I write about. So that's why Twitter wasn't actually spread by Oprah. She got on board just as it was getting really huge, right? But it jumped from the, west coast of the US over to Boston because there were lots of networks of academics that were spreading it around. So it wasn't spreading like a virus. Behaviour change kind of jumps all over the place based on these networks. And the more people in networks that are doing a particular behaviour, then that changes social norms, it becomes a new standard, et cetera, et cetera. That's how solar panels have, taken over a lot of Australian rooftops and that kind of thing. But yeah, the thinking about the influence you might have in your networks is critical to getting accelerated change. So everyone's got a network. You might have it at your local church or, your footy club, your music group, or at work, critically. That's where we spend a lot of our time for, So thinking about the influence that you could enact in those different circles to start creating some of the behaviour change that's required, like switching energy use, switching where the banking's happening. Like, don't just think about you needing to do it in your own life by yourself, but how can you actually get some of those networks to make some of those changes without it needing to be a whole other job because everyone's pretty busy. So, yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity to do lots on climate change that's very connected to your own life. You don't have to go and reinvent yourself or the entire way you run your life.
The dark cynic in me still looks at we hear a thing, carbon footprint, and then my carbon footprint's pretty big. Oh, I've got this roll of film here. It's this ancient archaic stuff made of gelatin.
I remember
Don't tell
that
the other
stuff.
vegans, but I put it in a camera to take photos of my kids. Oh, it's come from another country. Oh, the carbon footprint on that is huge. Bad you for buying film. Bad. Carbon footprint is two words that were come up with for a PR company employed by BP.
Yeah.
To have the effect that, you, the end user, are the reason that there's a problem, not us, the gajillion dollar, fossil fuel extractors.
Whose interest does that serve?
Yeah. So I guess where I'm going with that is, there is the judgment we have as neighbours when we see one of our neighbours on bin night put the wrong thing in the recycling bin. Oh, bad, they're doing the bad thing. But then, hang on, what? It's okay to open up 50,000 square kilometres for gas exploration? What the fuck? Like, at what point do we, our own, as you mentioned, what can we do today in our own service? But where's the advocacy? Where's the pressure for the upstream solutions? And how can we make those happen as fast as possible, Claire?
Oh, there's so many campaigns that are happening right now to stop the extractive industries from getting bigger because the International Energy Agency, that wildly anarchic organisation, actually, like these anarchists at the IEA, they said that last year that there can be no more coal, oil or gas projects opened up. So that is clear. So when you've got a really conservative organisation saying that, we know what's at stake. Look, there's really big projects that are coming down the line now, particularly around gas, and I would encourage people to go and have a look at those campaigns, particularly around the Scarborough Basin and the Barossa. So they're worth looking at. You can have a look at the organisations that I've listed in climateactionstartshere.com, just a page on my website where you can get some ideas of where to start, because there are so many campaigns. I think what we need now is people thinking they can do more than recycling to help with this problem. So the same research that showed lots of people really care about climate change also showed that the biggest amount of activity is around recycling. And recycling is a really great thing to do because we need to do it, but it is about between 2 and 4% of Australia's contribution to carbon emissions, whereas everything else, my friends, is energy. The mining and burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil and gas is the problem, and by joining efforts with other people that are supporting First Nations communities that don't want extractive industries on their land, by ensuring that we can halt or delay those projects, that is what is required so we can create enough time for the solutions to come in at the price that can make it work in a clean way. Like, that's just what we need to do. So there's just so many options. I could tell you about, many campaigns that are happening everywhere, but it's probably best to just go and have a look at climateactionstartshere.com and you'll see all of those groups that are doing that work.
So as much as it's important to make sure that I don't get the plastic containers in the paper bin, it is to make sure that my windows aren't drafty so that my either heating or air conditioning is as efficient as it possibly can be.
Yeah, well, think about different systems. So there's your system of yourself, there's your system of your household, there's a system of your network or community, then there's big global economic systems. And when we work as advocates, we're thinking about how do we create the conditions within that system for kind of tipping points to occur and for change to happen really quickly. And they'll be like, the climate movement's been working for years and years and years and years, and then all of a sudden the politics has shifted. It didn't just happen, It actually started happening in the 2019 election, big swings away from the coalition because of climate change. But all of these issues have built up. Community concern has risen. We are facing all of these climate impacts, the repeated flooding this year, the bushfires. All of these things have added up to the community saying, enough, the system is tipping. And that's created all of this political space. So one of the best things you can do is think about how you're influencing a system. How are you creating some of those conditions for change to occur? So yeah, it's I feel like there's lots of opportunity right now because of the economics, because of the technology shifts, and because people care more, where all of that's aligning. But I'm, like you, I have cynical moments aplenty. I despair. I freak out pretty often.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop me because I'm making sure I'm looking for the light to chase down. I'm looking for the good news. For someone who,
I'm going to go like three in a row on the stereotypes. Like for someone who grew up adjacent to Mullumbimby with parents who were, open quotes, farmers, and is now leading a, shall we say, medicinal healthcare company, that's carbon neutral. Like, okay, great. That's a great story, but you were kind of predestined. As you were researching the book and speaking with people, who are the people like McLeod that you were so surprised, like, wow, you, as someone who clearly is a more conservative thinker, you've approached this from a completely different angle. Like, what are some of the stories there? Because I think that's, I don't want to be, go, here's more stories of people just like me. I'm fascinated, what are some stories we can share of people like, wow, that's Uncle Bob, and Uncle Bob is now on that path?
Well, I wouldn't call him Uncle Bob, but there's this great guy, Alan Hyde, who I met, who is a retired engineer, and he's a Scouts leader, and he's moved for retirement back to the kind of in-laws family farm up in the Blue Mountains out on Mount Irvin, and he's a member of the bushfire Rural Fire Service, so he's a captain. And the Mount Wilson fire joined a backburn during the Black Summer fires that saw devastation through that entire area. But he's decided to take on a project that will never that he won't see the end of it in his own lifetime. He's basically going to partner with the Scouts and, collect seed, partner with his neighbours where they dedicate, portions of their property and replant the rainforest to create fire barrier and resilience, bring back the fireflies, but also get, the Scouts connecting with nature. This is not going to come off in the next 10 years. He's in his 70s, but he is committed to creating this model that anyone can pick up and replicate. He's not trying to build a big company or anything. So, he's just decided to embark on that journey when, he's got an engineering brain and a Scouts leader and lived in suburban Sydney. The other person I met who was just so brilliant was Susan Mungle. She is a mum of 4, lives in Kingaroy, the peanut capital of Australia. It's where Sir Joh Bjelke-Petersen hailed from.
I grew up in Queensland, mate.
Kingaroy, not far from the Toronto Power Station. Yeah, well, Suzanne, she had her freak out moment, and just went through an incredible roller coaster of climate grief. And that was prompted by Greta Thunberg at the UN saying, I'm holding you responsible. And she just wrote in her journal one day, I'm really sick of this. I don't feel like this anymore. I'm going to do something about it. And so she just started doing lots of stuff locally. Like she started the Eco Mums Facebook group. She's lobbying the South Burnett Regional Council. She's doing conversations with this fabulous organisation called Climate for Change. And when I spoke to her, she just is in peals of laughter about it because the only hippies she'd ever encountered were in the shops with the crystals. She just didn't know any of them. And so, so she's just taken, she's gone through this kind of turnaround in her worldview and in her life. And it took about 18 months. It didn't happen over a 10-year period. I think her life, you could see that she's really transformed. And it shows the potential in all of us to do that,
Part of why I'm fascinated with this book, because you do touch on this, is that I have this idea, and I would just love your thoughts on this, that one of the reasons that we haven't acted as quickly the comparison I have is the Montreal Protocol around CFCs and the hole in the ozone layer in the 80s. That was done and dusted in a couple of years, and it was incredible, but because it was one singular thing. And it was one singular cause, and it was pretty simple to find an economically viable solution and a timeline for people that were in countries that weren't able to get there. And Bob's your auntie's living lover, done. What is it about? Part of the reason that I feel that we're in such a pickle, as I mentioned earlier, is that it's a limitation of our own brain's processing power to actually conceive of this problem. And so it's not to say we should let ourselves off the hook, but there's a bit of latitude there, isn't it? What have you found out about that?
One of the biggest barriers to behaviour change on climate is the kind of barrier around people thinking it is too hard, and that showed up in our research. So just thinking it's too hard, I feel like I'm already doing a lot, it's too overwhelming, is actually a block. It's a tangible block. But what I did learn from, you're probably familiar with Renee Lertzman's work, who's a psychologist and expert in climate anxiety and climate distress. She teaches us that we need to be sharing how we're feeling about climate change because that unlocks the brain. It unlocks the prefrontal cortex when we're sharing our emotions and acknowledging them. And that part of the brain is what it controls our executive function. It's our ability to be creative. It's our ability to solve problems and find all these solutions that we need. And I think in our modern world we're kind of told that we should only be rational beings. But that's just rubbish. We're emotional beings. It's probably why I, buy the shoes that I want to buy. It's just stupid emotional decisions that have no kind of grounding in reality sometimes. I bought a really good pair of from an op shop, gold, these platform heels the other day. They're just awesome. But yeah, no rational, particularly when I also have a hip problem. That is a stupid thing to buy, but they are awesome. So you
I'm
just
sure.
kind of, we're emotional beings. But we've been taught that we need to be like good, rational producers in the economy, good little robots. And so the encouragement to actually acknowledge our emotional world, I think, is often cast aside. But it's fundamental to who we are as humans. And when we're sharing those moments, that actually allows our brain to be freer. So the problem is very huge. It's huge. It's overwhelming. But I do think when we have those moments of sharing, and I had loads of moments like that in writing the book and having these conversations where people did talk about how they felt about climate change, and they felt like moments of genuine empathy and care that led to these beautifully generative conversations that we need more of. Yeah, it's just kind of hard to do it sometimes.
We all do have our moment. I'm on this program. I've spoken with Margaret Klein Solomon, who spoke about Hurricane Sandy in 2012 being this big moment for her. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson, Dr. Ayana Elizabeth, we spoke about before. She, when an island of Barbuda, where she did a lot of marine research work, was just flattened. She had a moment. My moment was just reading the paper one day.
More prosaic.
That was it. Yeah, it was just a moment. Yet, in the last couple of years, we've seen, a fire. You mentioned the Mount Wilson fire. I remember speaking. I did a motorbike ride, a charity ride up in that way, and I remember speaking to one of the fireys there. So what, tell me, we were talking about it, and I goes, "Oh, it was a tough day." "Oh, was that the toughest day?" "No, the toughest day was the first 6 weeks," is what he said. We all have our moment. There's been, 3 once-in-a-100-year floods at the start of 2022. We've just declared a third La Nina. Boom, it's on the way. Why do we have to wait for these moments, Claire? Why do we have to wait for these moments for greater parts of society who have otherwise thought about this to go, that's not, right, that's behind it. Shit. Why do we have to wait for these moments?
I think we can learn so much from First Nations people about this.
Yeah.
Because I think the culture and practice of sharing story and tradition and lessons of what's come before allows you to place things in time and make plans. Like, I just feel like everything's a shock to us because we don't actually think about our history. We don't really think deeply about the lessons we can learn from past events. We just go, "Oh my goodness, we're surprised." Now we respond like reactive creatures. One of the best lessons I got from the book process was talking to Nola Turner-Jensen, she's a Wiradjuri woman, and she's basically rebuilding the language map of Wiradjuri country, which is one of the second biggest language group in Australia, and massive land territory in central New South Wales. And she taught me about totems and about care for country and about kind of building in awareness of your local environment as a daily practice. And if you're more observant, you're more likely to understand earlier the need to make adjustments. But we're not observing our world, not in that kind of habitual way, I don't think. We rely on the news, or we try and outsource it to someone else to do it for us. But I think we can learn a lot from thinking about keenly observing our environment, and also thinking about stories from history that allow us to think about how we can be getting ahead of some of these problems. It's kind of a non-specific thing, but it feels like some of those practices are key to how we can actually be more aware, rather than this kind of Pavlov's dog thing, where you kind of, "Oh my goodness, time to react again." Yeah. And also I think part of it's that there's a lot of people who don't have it amazing in Australian society. There's got a big problems with inequality. And particularly in places like the people who are going to bear the brunt of climate impacts are, the people who have had the least to do with causing it globally as much as in this country.
Oh, mate. Tell me about it. Like, Audrey's from Fiji.
Oh,
she grew
wow,
up there.
yeah.
We spent a lot of time there. A big part of why I am better now is I was over there for work, and I was working with my acceptance commitment therapist and remotely, and I would sit every day at the high tide mark and watch the tide come up underneath the stilts of the village where the beach used to be 20 metres away.
Yeah, wow.
And now the tide comes up underneath the village where these people have lived for hundreds of years and their ancestors are buried all around them. And it was awful, fucking awful, but I did it every day. And that just being with that discomfort that's one of the reasons that I'm now, I read about things like Thwaites Glacier and go, that is fucking terrible. But I can carry on with my day. That sort of thing would destroy me for weeks in the past.
Yeah.
But you're right about just observing things. There's two, it's a terrible joke, but there's two kinds of people. Those who are like, oh, fuck, where am I going to get a rat test? And there's me who's like, I read the news like 6 weeks ago and bought 50. Can I lend you one?
I have to say, I'm a bit more of a be prepared Girl Scout too, I'm a bit more that way inclined when I'm on top of things. But yeah, I think we don't think enough about how connected we are to our environment all the time, and just the practice of totems that I've learned about. It was such a gift to learn about that.
Yeah.
Just to kind of, if you see a totem, if you're an Aboriginal person, my understanding of it is you see one of your totems fly by, one of your birds, or see a plant, you think ancestor. And how do you look after your ancestors? How do you look after your family? Yep. And if you're thinking about how integrated you are with your environment in that way, you're going to be more observant and you're going to think more about solving problems before you're at that, oh my goodness, I've got to go to the shop and fix this thing in the next 10 minutes.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. We speak about animals, we spoke about agriculture. There's a reason people give more money to the RSPCA than they do to the homeless, because an animal's an animal and there's no emotion involved. But this is, at this point, it's still a dirt, water and animal problem in our country. But at fringes, it's a people problem, but it's about to be a massive fucking people problem. And being confronted with the emotions of displacement and displaced people is hard. And it's, what in your work have you found about the inroads around that? There's people I am connected with who deal with climate grief in Kiribati because their nation is literally disappearing. There's through Audrey's family network. There's people who are connected to the crew that bought thousands of acres on a mountain in Fiji. They live on an island right now, but they've bought it, so they've got somewhere to go.
Wow.
In 20, 30 years, so they can tell their community, we're going to stay here as long as we can, but it's cool. We've got somewhere to go. We bought this land. That land's there. It's ours. We've got somewhere to go.
It's mind blowing.
And a lot of people from the Pacific will end up on our shores. You think about South Vietnam. Most of South Vietnam is maybe 2 meters above the high tide mark. Yeah. All right, that's a shitload of people who are going to have to find somewhere to go. So
it's happening now.
It's very, very
in the Northern Rivers.
Yeah. Without a doubt, it's very quickly going to become a people problem. What have you learned about displacement, about community, about cohesion, about what communities are going to need to do to adapt to and welcome strangers in, which, we're Australian, we'll be fine with strangers coming to our shores. Fuck off.
Yeah, one of the beautiful stories in the book is from the town of Cobargo on the south coast of New South Wales on Yuin country. Cobargo was the town that was made famous because, people wouldn't shake the Prime Minister's hand when Scott Morrison came in for a visit. Yeah, national headlines. You probably remember the whole thing.
Goosebumps thinking about it. The look in their eyes was just, you're taking the piss. And I think at that moment they felt like all of us.
It was a community that was on its knees, but I interviewed this wonderful woman called Deborah Summer, who is skilled in something, it's a practice or a network community called the art of hosting, which is basically a really great way to have facilitated group conversations that uses a whole lot of tools and techniques and practices and all of the things that you'd need to make a cohesive space. And so after quite quickly as the fires were calming, there was a couple of community consultation, usual processes held for that community that didn't go amazingly well. And so Deborah thought, well, I've got some skills. How about we just kind of set up a time and a place and see who comes along. And they called it the Cobargo Community Catch-Ups. And they had it at the local hall. They put the date and the time out. 100 people turned up. and people cried and they laughed, but they had quite careful and considered holding of the space so that they could have small group conversations. And they had a few of these. The pandemic then kind of got in the way and they started doing them online and things. But just sparking those conversations helped generate projects. And, you know, half the main street burned down in Cobargo. Beautiful historic main street, you know, colonial kind of streetscape. But that main street now is being rebuilt and a lot of the businesses are going to be cooperatively owned. They've got this new tool library, which has got like seriously impressive machinery in it, but it's also become a meeting place for people. There's a really traumatised community. Lots of people lost their lives down there. People are still looking for places to live down there and rebuilding. But they've had creative art projects that have sprung up, you know, children's books and, you know, they've got a community garden that's kind of reinvigorated, and all of those things might seem quite small, but they're really not. They're really important things that have helped rebuild that community so it's, you know, more connected than it was pre-fire. It was always pretty connected, a small community, about 800 people. But, you know, just by holding time and space where people were allowed to connect on that really emotional human level at that time has been helpful for that community. And they've raised like millions of dollars. You know, they've been able to get all this government funding because the, you know, Cobargo Folk Association, they have a folk festival down there every year. They decided to raise a whole bunch of money that leveraged government money as well. So it's a great example of how people coming together and someone saying, well, I've got some skills. What can I do? And just giving something a go to see if it would work. And it's led to amazing things.
I mean, a lot of people have known about this for a long time. Like, there's something that the Queensland government, as part of their aid, gave a lot of TAFE syllabus to Kiribati, kind of knowing that eventually those people are going to have to go somewhere.
Yeah.
It'd be great if they had skills and a syllabus that we recognise so they can get straight to work and they can have a place. And that shit's been happening since, that's 20 years that stuff's been happening.
Practical.
So people have known this a long time. What can we start to bring into our lives around what can we start to get, skills that we can start to work on around, there's people who aren't from here now living here. Like, what are some ways that we can, I guess, prep ourselves for, the demographic of our country changing over the next 20, 30 years?
It's already changed a lot. We've got the last census showed that the biggest diaspora groups from folks living overseas, after England and New Zealand, I think, is China, India and the Philippines. So, our society is already changing a lot. And I think we can learn a lot from place-based efforts that are designed to build acceptance and, mutual aid and mutual support that have been springing up a lot through the pandemic. But also before that, there's an awesome organisation called the Sydney Alliance, which you might be familiar with, which is it's an alliance model of a whole lot of organisations from different kind of orientations and communities, religious and ethnic, that have come together to work on solutions for that community. So, the trade unions and the, Muslim Women's Association and the Jewish organisations and, some of the Western Sydney-based organisations particularly. And they've got a project called Voices for Power, which is not only connecting people on their need for cheaper energy, which is a real big thing in, where you've got to run air conditioners a lot more frequently because it's, on average, in summer 10 degrees hotter in Western Sydney than it is in the eastern suburbs.
Jesus.
And so energy's a lot more expensive. People don't switch it on.
Yeah.
And, so there's those types of issues, but it's also people do care about climate and they've been building solid relationships and ways of working on common cause and common concern. And, they've just won a massive policy reform from the New South Wales government called Bill Busters, which is, so low-income folks can defer their energy rebate and put that into doing energy efficiency upgrades and appliance upgrades and putting solar panels on. So, that's prioritised for Western Sydney, which is a great new move. But they campaigned on that for 4 or 5 years, common concern. Yeah. And I think if we look for, areas where we can come together, we'll learn more about the humans in the process. So doing practical things, not kind of ideological debates or,
Yes.
conversation starters are great, but actually doing practical things together. And the Sydney Alliance did brilliant work to support international students that were looking for support, that were left, out in the cold during the pandemic. So I think we can learn a lot from those place-based organisations that are looking to build coalitions and build common cause from different parts of our community, because they are actually leading the country in that thinking. It's about the network.
Claire, you spoke to it is. It is. You spoke to a lot of people from all over the country doing wild things. You're not a financial advisor, neither am I. But let's just say you had a self-managed super fund. Where are you going all in?
I'm not going to make recommendations for any brands, but I would suggest. I'm not going to offer financial advice. I would suggest people go to Market Forces, because that's where you can actually see a list of well-researched information on the best super funds that you might want to select, and go and have a look there. Recommendations are pretty clear. If you want to look at switching your energy use, Green Electricity Guide that Greenpeace produces, awesome place to start. So, think about doing those things one at a time. Don't make a list of 20 things, because you won't do any of them. One at a time. And more importantly, when you're leaving your fossil fuel-based providers, tell them why you're going. And then tell everybody else in your networks that you've made the switch too, because that will help people change their behaviour.
Dollars are votes, mate. Dollars are votes. In between elections, dollars are votes.
That's right.
Every single time you tap your card, you're voting for something. And you could not be more active than that. There's a reason why sanctions work. Economic sanctions work. There's a reason why they work.
That's right.
Because eventually people are like, oh man, the fridge is empty. Okay. Claire, I'm just so grateful that you came on the show, and so grateful to hear you speak. As I mentioned at the start of this chat, there was a time in my life when I didn't believe that there was somebody like you in the world. There are thousands, if not millions, of people like you. Even though I knew it was true at the time, my brain couldn't accept it. So it's lovely to actually see it and feel it in my body. It's bloody nice. The book's called Together We Can, and if there's any way that I can be of service, please don't hesitate, okay?
Thanks so much. It's been awesome having this conversation. It's just been super fun, and I could talk for hours. It's so cool.
We'll do part 2 one day.
Yeah, one day. We'll do that.